The gunshot echoed across the desert canyon just as Yates Remington was about to head back to his ranch after a supply run to Beaver, Utah. And he knew instantly that someone was in trouble. His horse, a strong bay gelding named Buck, tensed beneath him as two more shots rang out in quick succession. Yates had lived alone on his ranch for the past 3 years, ever since his father died and left him the sprawling property in the Utah Territory wilderness. At 26 years old, he had grown accustomed to solitude, finding comfort in the predictable rhythms of ranch work and the quiet company of his livestock. The year was 1878, and while civilization was slowly creeping westward, this part of Utah remained wild and dangerous. Without hesitation, Yates urged Buck toward the sound of gunfire, his hand instinctively checking the revolver at his hip. As he rounded a rocky outcropping, the scene before him made his blood run cold. A stagecoach lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily in the air. 3 men on horseback circled the wreckage like vultures, their bandanas pulled up over their faces. One of them was dragging a woman by her arm, her dress torn and dusty, her dark auburn hair falling loose from its pins. "Let me go." The woman screamed, fighting against her captor with surprising strength. The bandit laughed, a cruel sound that carried across the desert air. "You are coming with us, sweetheart. That fancy dress tells me your family will pay good money to get you back." Yates did not think, he just acted. Years of living on the edge of civilization had honed his instincts, and right now those instincts told him this woman needed help. He drew his revolver and fired a warning shot into the air. "Let her go," he called out, his voice steady despite his racing heart. The 3 bandits turned toward him, their hands moving to their weapons. The one holding the woman shoved her roughly to the ground and reached for his gun. Yates was faster. He fired again, this time aiming for the dirt near the horse's hooves. The animals reared and bucked, throwing their riders off balance. "Next one won't be a warning," Yates said, keeping his revolver trained on the men. The bandits exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. They were 3 against 1, but Yates had the advantage of surprise and a steady aim. More importantly, he was defending someone, and there was a determination in his eyes that spoke of a man who would not back down. "This ain't over," the leader spat, gathering his reins. "Come on, boys. She ain't worth dying over." The 3 men wheeled their horses around and galloped off into the canyon, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Yates kept his gun ready until they disappeared from sight, then quickly dismounted and ran to the woman's side. She was struggling to sit up, her face pale beneath the coating of dust. Up close, Yates could see she was young, probably around 22 or 23, with striking hazel eyes that were currently wide with shock and fear. Blood trickled from a cut on her temple and her hands were scraped raw. "Are you hurt?" Yates asked, holstering his gun and kneeling beside her. "Can you stand?" The woman looked at him, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. Then she took a shaky breath and nodded. "I think so. My head is spinning, but nothing feels broken." Yates offered his hand and she took it, allowing him to help her to her feet. She swayed slightly and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Easy now. You have taken quite a tumble." "The driver," she said suddenly, her eyes widening. "Mr. Henderson, is he all right?" Yates looked toward the overturned stagecoach and saw a man lying motionless near the front wheel. He left the woman leaning against a rock and went to check on the driver. One look told him everything he needed to know. The man's neck was bent at an unnatural angle, his eyes staring sightlessly at the sky. "I am sorry," Yates said softly, returning to the woman's side. "He did not survive the crash." Her hand flew to her mouth and tears welled in her eyes. "Oh no, poor Mr. Henderson, he was so kind." He told me stories all the way from Salt Lake City. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Yates said gently. "Those bandits might come back with reinforcements. Can you ride?" The woman nodded, wiping at her tears with a trembling hand. "Yes, I can ride, but all my belongings were in that coach. Everything I own. Right now, staying alive is more important than belongings," Yates said. "My ranch is about an hour's ride from here. You can rest there, and tomorrow I will take you into Beaver to report this to the sheriff." She looked at him then, really looked at him, taking in his weathered face, his honest eyes, and the strong set of his shoulders. "Why did you help me? You could have been killed." The question caught Yates off guard. He had not stopped to consider why he had intervened. It had simply been the right thing to do. "I could not ride away and leave you in danger," he said simply. "That is not the kind of man my father raised me to be." Something in his words seemed to reassure her, because she nodded and allowed him to help her up onto Buck. Yates swung up behind her, his arms on either side as he took the reins. The woman stiffened at first, unused to such proximity with a stranger, but as they started moving, she seemed to relax slightly. "I am Adelaide Foster," she said after they had ridden in silence for several minutes. "I was traveling to Beaver to take a position as a schoolteacher." "Yates Remington," he replied. "I run a cattle ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Well, I try to run it. It has been just me since my father passed." "I am sorry for your loss," Adelaide said softly. They fell into silence again, but it was a more comfortable one now. Yates was acutely aware of Adelaide's presence in front of him, the way she smelled faintly of lavender despite the dust and fear. He had not been this close to a woman in years, not since Emma Thatcher had married the banker's son and moved to Denver. The sun was setting by the time they reached the ranch, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ranch house was modest but well-maintained, a 2-story wooden structure with a wide porch and a barn nearby. Several cattle grazed in the distance, and a couple of chickens scattered as Buck approached. Yates dismounted first and helped Adelaide down. She winced as her feet hit the ground, and he realized she had lost her shoes somewhere during the ordeal. "Come inside," he said. "I will get you some water and see what I can do about that cut on your head." The interior of the house was surprisingly neat for a bachelor's dwelling. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a large stone fireplace dominating one wall. Simple furniture filled the space, practical rather than decorative, but everything was clean and organized. Adelaide sank into a chair at the wooden table while Yates pumped water into a basin and found a clean cloth. He approached her carefully, as if she were a skittish colt, and gently began cleaning the cut on her temple. "This might sting," he warned before dabbing at the wound. Adelaide hissed in pain but did not pull away. "I have endured worse today," she said with a weak attempt at humor. As Yates tended to her injury, he found himself studying her face. Even covered in dust and blood, Adelaide was beautiful, but it was more than that. There was a strength in her eyes, a resilience that had kept her fighting even when those bandits had grabbed her. "There," he said, stepping back. "It is not deep, should heal clean." "Thank you," Adelaide said, "for everything. If you had not come along when you did, I do not know what would have happened to me." Yates turned away to hide the anger that flashed across his face at the thought of what those men had planned. "You are safe now. That is what matters." He busied himself preparing a simple meal of bread, cheese, and some leftover stew from the night before. Adelaide watched him work, and he could feel her eyes on him, assessing, wondering who this stranger was who had saved her life. "This is delicious," Adelaide said after taking her first bite of the stew. "You are a good cook." Yates felt heat rise to his cheeks. "It is nothing fancy. When you live alone, you learn to make do." How long have you been alone out here? 3 years since Pa died. He had a heart attack during the spring roundup. By the time I got him into town, it was too late. The pain of that day still lingered, though time had dulled its sharp edges. That must be terribly lonely, Adelaide said softly. Yates shrugged. I have the cattle, the horses. Plenty of work to keep me busy, and I go into town when I need supplies or company. But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He was lonely. He went to bed each night in an empty house and woke each morning to silence. There were days when the only voice he heard was his own, talking to the animals as he worked. After they finished eating, Yates showed Adelaide to his father's old room on the second floor. You can sleep here tonight. The sheets are clean. I will bed down in the barn. I cannot take your room, Adelaide protested. You have already done so much. It is my father's room, not mine, Yates said. I have not used it since he passed. Please, I insist. Adelaide looked around the simple room with its narrow bed and plain dresser. A few of his father's belongings still sat on the nightstand, a pocket watch and a leather-bound Bible. Thank you, Yates, truly. The way she said his name sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. He nodded and quickly left before he could say something foolish. That night, Yates lay on a pile of hay in the barn, staring up at the rafters and thinking about the woman sleeping in his house. He had saved her life today, but somehow he felt as if his own life had just been altered in a way he could not yet understand. Morning came early, as it always did on a ranch. Yates was up with the sun, feeding the animals and checking on the cattle. He was carrying a bucket of water to the trough when he noticed smoke rising from the house's chimney. Curious, he headed back to find Adelaide in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. I hope you do not mind, she said, looking slightly embarrassed. I wanted to do something to thank you. I found eggs in the hen house and some bacon in your larder. Yates stood in the doorway, momentarily stunned. The smell of cooking food filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the windows, catching in Adelaide's auburn hair. She had washed her face and attempted to fix her hair, though without proper pins. It hung in a thick braid down her back. She was wearing the same torn dress from yesterday, but somehow she looked lovely. You did not have to do that, Yates said, finding his voice. I wanted to, Adelaide insisted, turning back to the stove. Besides, I was hungry and I assumed you would be too. They ate together at the table, and Yates was surprised by how comfortable it felt to have someone else in the house. Adelaide told him about her life back east in Philadelphia, where she had trained to be a teacher. My parents died last year in a typhoid outbreak, she explained, her voice steady despite the sadness in her eyes. I had no other family, and the school where I was teaching closed due to lack of funds. When I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Beaver, Utah, it seemed like a chance to start over. That took courage, Yates said. Coming all this way alone. Adelaide smiled sadly. I did not have much choice. Sometimes courage is just another word for having nowhere else to go. After breakfast, Yates hitched up his wagon and they made the journey into Beaver. The town was small but growing, with a main street lined with shops, a church, a saloon, and the sheriff's office. News of the stagecoach attack had already reached town, brought by a rancher who had passed the wreckage earlier that morning. Sheriff Tom Dalton was a weathered man in his 50s, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. He listened carefully as Adelaide recounted the attack, taking notes in a small leather book. Those sound like the Mason brothers, the sheriff said grimly. They have been causing trouble up and down the territory for months. We will get a posse together and see if we can track them down. What about Mr. Henderson? Adelaide asked. The stagecoach driver. We sent some men out to bring back his body this morning. He will get a proper burial. The sheriff turned to Yates. "You did a good thing, son, helping Miss Foster. Could have ended badly if you had not come along." Yates shifted uncomfortably under the praise. "Just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Adelaide said quietly, meeting his eyes. "Not everyone." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Miss Foster, about your teaching position. I will need to speak with the school board, but given what you have been through, I am sure they will understand if you need a few days to recover before starting work." Adelaide's face fell. "The position is still available then. I was worried that after missing my scheduled arrival." "The school does not even have its building finished yet," the sheriff said with a chuckle. "Construction is running behind as usual. You have at least 2 weeks before you will be needed, maybe more." "But where will I stay?" Adelaide asked, and Yates could hear the worry in her voice. "All my money was in my traveling case, which is probably scattered across the desert by now." The sheriff frowned. "The boarding house is full up with railroad surveyors, and the hotel—" He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. "What about the hotel?" Adelaide pressed. "It is not a proper place for a lady," the sheriff said finally. "The owner rents rooms by the hour, if you understand my meaning." Adelaide's cheeks flushed with embarrassment and frustration. Yates watched her struggle to maintain her composure, saw the way her hands clenched in her lap. She had lost everything and found herself stranded in a strange town with nowhere to go. "She can stay at my ranch," Yates heard himself say before he could think better of it. Both Adelaide and the sheriff turned to stare at him. "I mean, temporarily," Yates added quickly. "Until the school building is ready and she can start teaching. My father's room is just sitting empty. It seems foolish to have her sleep in an improper hotel when there is a perfectly good room going unused." "Yates, I cannot impose on you like that," Adelaide said, though he could hear the hope in her voice. "It is no imposition," Yates insisted. "You can help around the ranch if you want to feel useful. God knows I could use an extra pair of hands, but no pressure. You are welcome either way." The sheriff looked between them, clearly weighing the propriety of such an arrangement. Finally, he nodded. "It is irregular, but given the circumstances, I suppose it makes sense. And Yates is a good man, respected in these parts. No one will think poorly of it, especially since you will only be there a short while." Adelaide met Yates's eyes, and he saw gratitude and something else there, something he could not quite name. "Thank you," she said. "I promise I will not be a burden." "You could never be that," Yates said, and he meant it. They spent the rest of the day in Beaver, with Yates helping Adelaide piece together what she would need to get by. The general store owner's wife, Mrs. Peterson, took pity on Adelaide and gave her some basic clothing and supplies on credit, to be repaid once Adelaide started receiving her teaching salary. As they drove back to the ranch in the late afternoon, Adelaide was quiet, clutching the small bundle of belongings in her lap. Yates could tell she was overwhelmed by everything that had happened, and he did not push her to talk. But as the ranch came into view, Adelaide turned to him and said, "I will help you, you know, with the ranch. I may not know much about cattle, but I grew up helping my father in his garden. I can cook and clean and mend. I will earn my keep." "You do not have to," Yates said. "I want to," Adelaide insisted. "You saved my life, Yates. The least I can do is help you with your chores." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Yates would wake early and tend to the most demanding ranch work, while Adelaide would prepare breakfast and care for the chickens and the vegetable garden that Yates's father had planted years ago, but that Yates had neglected. In the afternoons, Adelaide insisted on learning how to do more ranch work, and Yates found himself teaching her how to milk the cow and mend fences. Adelaide proved to be a quick learner, unafraid of hard work or getting her hands dirty. Yates was impressed by her determination and resilience. Most Eastern women he had met would have been horrified by the rough conditions of ranch life, but Adelaide seemed to thrive in it. One evening, about a week after Adelaide's arrival, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become a habit of theirs, this quiet time after the day's work was done. Adelaide had made a simple dinner of fried chicken and potatoes, and they had eaten their fill. "Tell me about your father," Adelaide said suddenly. "What was he like?" Yates was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "He was a good man, strong but fair. He came out west after my mother died in childbirth, bringing me with him. I was just a baby. He wanted to build something, to create a legacy. This ranch was his dream." "He would be proud of you," Adelaide said, "keeping it going on your own." "I do not know about that," Yates said with a rueful smile. "The ranch has been struggling. Cattle prices are down, and it is hard to manage everything alone. Some days I wonder if I should just sell it and move on." "But this is your home," Adelaide said, surprised. "Your father's legacy." "A legacy is not worth much if you are too tired and lonely to enjoy it," Yates said quietly. Adelaide reached over and placed her hand on his, a gesture of comfort that sent a jolt through Yates's entire body. "You are not alone now," she said softly. Their eyes met, and Yates felt something shift between them. It was not just gratitude or friendship anymore. It was something deeper, something that made his heart beat faster and his breath catch in his throat. "Adelaide," he started to say, but she pulled her hand back, suddenly flustered. "I should clean up the dishes," she said, standing quickly. "It is getting late." Yates watched her retreat into the house, cursing himself for whatever he had been about to say. Adelaide was a guest, someone who would be leaving in a week or two to start her teaching position. He had no right to develop feelings for her, no matter how natural it felt to have her by his side. But over the following days, Yates found it increasingly difficult to ignore what he was feeling. Every smile Adelaide gave him, every laugh they shared, every accidental touch as they worked side by side, it all added up to something he could not deny. He was falling in love with her. Adelaide seemed to be wrestling with her own emotions. Yates would catch her watching him sometimes, a soft expression on her face that made him hope she might feel the same way. But then she would look away, and the moment would pass. 2 weeks after Adelaide's arrival, a rider came from town with news. The school building was nearly finished, and the school board wanted to meet with Adelaide to discuss when she could start teaching. They also had arranged for her to stay with the preacher and his wife until she could find more permanent lodging. "That is wonderful news," Yates said, trying to sound enthusiastic even though his heart was sinking. "You must be excited." Adelaide looked at him strangely. "Yes, of course. It is what I came here for." "When do they want you to start?" Yates asked. "The meeting is in 3 days," Adelaide said. "I suppose I should pack my things." But she did not pack. And when the next day came, Adelaide threw herself into her work around the ranch with an almost desperate energy. Yates did not understand what was happening until he found her that evening sitting on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands. "Adelaide," he said gently, sitting down beside her. "What is wrong?" She looked up at him, and he was shocked to see tears streaming down her face. "I do not want to leave," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I should be excited about teaching, about starting my new life, but all I can think about is how much I am going to miss this place. Miss you." Yates's heart leaped at her words. "You do not have to go," he said. "Not if you do not want to." "But the teaching position," Adelaide protested. "It is what I came here for. It is the only reason I am in Utah." "Maybe it was the reason you came," Yates said carefully, "but it does not have to be the reason you stay." Adelaide searched his face. "What are you saying?" Yates took a deep breath, knowing he was about to take the biggest risk of his life. "I am saying that over these past 2 weeks, You have become more than just a guest in my home. You have brought life back to this ranch, back to me. I wake up looking forward to seeing your smile, and I go to bed wishing the day had been longer so I could spend more time with you. I know I do not have much to offer, just a struggling ranch and a lonely rancher. But if you were willing to stay, if you felt even a fraction of what I feel for you, then I would spend every day trying to make you happy." Adelaide's eyes widened, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yates, I feel the same way. I have been trying so hard not to because I thought I would have to leave, but I cannot help it. These 2 weeks with you have been the happiest of my life. When I think about leaving, about never seeing you again, it breaks my heart." Yates reached up and gently wiped away her tears with his thumb. "Then stay," he whispered. "Please stay." "But what about the school? What about teaching?" "There will be other teachers," Yates said, "but there is only one you. And I know we have not known each other long, but when something feels this right, does time really matter?" Adelaide laughed through her tears. "My mother would have said I was being reckless and impulsive." "What do you say?" Yates asked. Adelaide leaned forward and kissed him, a soft, sweet kiss that held all the promise of a future together. When she pulled back, she was smiling. "I say yes. I will stay." Yates pulled her into his arms, holding her close as relief and joy washed over him. He had saved Adelaide's life that day in the canyon, but somehow she had saved his too. She had brought warmth and laughter back into his lonely existence, had reminded him what it felt like to share his life with someone. The next day, they rode into Beaver together to speak with the school board. Adelaide explained that she had decided not to accept the teaching position, that she had other plans. The board members were disappointed but understanding, especially when Sheriff Dalton vouched for Yates's character. "I suppose congratulations are in order," the sheriff said with a knowing smile. Yates felt his face heat up. "We have not made any official plans yet, but yes, Adelaide has agreed to stay at the ranch." "As what, exactly?" asked Mrs. Peterson, the general store owner's wife, who was also on the school board. Adelaide and Yates exchanged glances. They had not discussed the specifics, too caught up in the emotion of deciding to be together. "As my wife," Yates said firmly, reaching for Adelaide's hand. "If she will have me." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "I will." Mrs. Peterson beamed. "Well, that is wonderful news. When is the wedding?" "As soon as possible," Yates said, looking at Adelaide for confirmation. She nodded, her eyes shining. "How about next Sunday?" the sheriff suggested. "That will give folks time to prepare. Reverend Mitchell can perform the ceremony, and I am sure the whole town will want to celebrate." And so, 1 week later, on a beautiful Sunday afternoon in late summer of 1878, Yates Remington married Adelaide Foster in the small white church in Beaver, Utah. Adelaide wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair. Yates wore his best suit, freshly cleaned and pressed. The church was packed with townspeople, most of whom Yates had known for years. They were curious about his bride, this mysterious woman from the East who had captured the heart of their reserved neighbor. But as Yates and Adelaide exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for the rest of their lives, any skepticism melted away. It was clear to everyone present that these two people were truly in love. The wedding celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than Yates had seen in years. But finally, as the stars came out, Yates and Adelaide slipped away from the festivities and rode back to the ranch, their ranch together. That night, as they lay in bed in the master bedroom that Yates had carefully prepared for their wedding night, Adelaide traced her fingers over his chest and said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had not come along that day? If you had decided to take a different route home?" Yates caught her hand and brought it to his lips. I try not to think about it. The idea of you facing those bandits alone, of never meeting you, it is too terrible to consider. I think fate brought us together, Adelaide said softly. I think I was always meant to end up here with you. I used to think fate was cruel, Yates admitted. Taking my mother before I could know her, taking my father just when I needed him most. But maybe fate was just leading me here to this moment to you. Adelaide kissed him then, and they lost themselves in each other. Two lonely souls who had found home in each other's arms. The months that followed were the happiest of Yates's life. Adelaide transformed the ranch house into a real home, adding touches of warmth and comfort that had been missing for years. She painted the walls, sewed curtains for the windows, and planted flowers around the porch. But more than the physical changes, she filled the house with laughter and love. Together, they worked to improve the ranch. Adelaide proved to have a head for business, helping Yates negotiate better prices for his cattle and manage the ranch's finances. Under her guidance, they began to turn a profit for the first time in years, but it was not all work. They would take evening rides through the canyon, race their horses across the open plains, and spend long nights talking about their dreams and plans for the future. Yates taught Adelaide how to shoot, and she proved to be a surprisingly good markswoman. Adelaide taught Yates how to dance, and though he protested at first, he grew to love the feel of her in his arms as they waltzed around the living room to music only they could hear. Winter came, bringing cold winds and snow that blanketed the ranch in white. Yates and Adelaide would huddle by the fire in the evenings, Adelaide reading aloud from books she had ordered from back east, while Yates whittled small wooden animals for the children of Beaver. It was during one of those cozy evenings in January that Adelaide told him the news. They were sitting together on the sofa, Adelaide's head resting on his shoulder, when she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "There is someone else who will be joining us come summer," she said softly. It took Yates a moment to understand what she was saying. When he did, he sat up straight, his eyes wide. "You mean, we are going to have a baby?" Adelaide nodded, her face glowing with happiness. "Yes, I saw the doctor in Beaver yesterday to confirm. He says I am about 3 months along." Yates let out a whoop of joy and swept Adelaide into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down. "We are going to be parents," he said, his voice full of wonder. "I am going to be a father." "You are going to be a wonderful father," Adelaide assured him, cupping his face in her hands. "Our child is so lucky to have you." That night, as they lay in bed, Yates placed his hand on Adelaide's still flat stomach and marveled at the miracle growing inside her. A year ago, he had been alone, wondering if he would spend the rest of his life as a lonely rancher. Now, he had a wife he adored and a child on the way. His life felt full and purposeful in a way it never had before. The pregnancy was not easy on Adelaide. She suffered from terrible morning sickness in the early months, and Yates would hold her hair back and bring her cool water, wishing he could take her discomfort away. But Adelaide was strong and resilient, and as the months passed and her belly grew round, she seemed to bloom with health and happiness. Yates became almost obsessively protective, insisting that Adelaide rest more and work less. But Adelaide would have none of it, continuing to help around the ranch as much as she was able. "I am pregnant, not an invalid," she would tell him whenever he tried to coddle her. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, Yates. I will be fine." Still, Yates worried. The nearest doctor was in Beaver, over an hour away by wagon. He made Adelaide promise that at the first sign of labor, she would let him know immediately so he could get her to town. But when the time came, in late July during a scorching hot afternoon, there was no time to get to town. Adelaide's water broke while she was in the garden, and the contractions came fast and hard. Yates ran to get Mrs. Henderson, a neighbor who lived a few miles away and who had helped deliver dozens of babies over the years. But by the time they returned, Adelaide was already well into labor, gripping the bedposts and breathing through the pain. "You are doing great," Mrs. Henderson said, checking Adelaide's progress. "This baby is coming fast." First babies usually take longer, but this little one is eager to meet the world. Yates stood by Adelaide's side, holding her hand and murmuring words of encouragement even though he felt completely helpless. Adelaide was in pain, and there was nothing he could do to fix it. All he could do was be there for her, love her, support her. "I love you," he whispered into her ear during a brief lull between contractions. "You are the strongest person I know." Adelaide managed a weak smile. "Tell me that again when this is over." Hours passed, though to Yates it felt like an eternity. The sun set and rose again, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. And just as the first rays of morning light crept through the bedroom window, Adelaide gave one final push, and the sound of a baby's cry filled the air. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, holding up the squirming, red-faced infant. "A healthy baby boy." Yates felt tears streaming down his face as he watched Mrs. Henderson clean and wrap the baby in a soft blanket. When she placed the bundle in Adelaide's arms, Yates sat on the edge of the bed and looked down at his son in wonder. "He is perfect," Adelaide whispered, exhausted but radiant. "Look at him, Yates. We made him." The baby had a shock of dark hair and tiny, perfect features. His eyes were closed, but his little mouth was open, making soft, sucking sounds. Yates reached out and gently touched his son's hand, marveling when tiny fingers wrapped around his own. "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked. Yates thought for a moment. "I would like to name him after my father, if that is all right with you." "William. William Henry Remington." "William," Adelaide repeated, trying out the name. "I love it. Hello, William. Welcome to the world, little one, Mrs. Henderson stayed for a few more hours to make sure Adelaide was recovering well and to teach Yates the basics of caring for a newborn. Then she left, promising to check in again in a few days. Alone with his new family, Yates sat in the rocking chair by the window, holding William while Adelaide slept. The baby was warm and solid in his arms, already the most precious thing in his life besides Adelaide. "I promise I will be a good father to you," Yates whispered to his sleeping son. "I will teach you about the land, about honor and hard work. I will show you how to ride and rope and shoot. But most importantly, I will teach you about love. Because your mother taught me that love is what makes a house a home, what makes life worth living." As if in response, William made a small sound and snuggled closer to his father's chest. And Yates felt his heart expand with a love so powerful it almost hurt. The first few months with a newborn were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William was a good baby, but he still needed constant care and attention. Yates and Adelaide took turns walking the floor with him at night when he would not sleep, and they stumbled through their days in a haze of exhaustion and joy. But they did it together, supporting each other, laughing at their mistakes and marveling at every small milestone William reached. His first smile, the first time he rolled over, the way his eyes would light up when he saw his parents, it was all magical. As William grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch continued to prosper. Yates hired a couple of ranch hands to help with the work, which gave him more time to spend with his family. Adelaide started a small business selling her preserves and baked goods to the general store in Beaver, and her products became so popular that she could barely keep up with demand. They were busy and tired, but they were happy. Every evening, after the work was done and William was tucked into bed, Yates and Adelaide would sit on the porch and watch the sunset, just as they had done since Adelaide's first days at the ranch. "You ever miss teaching?" Yates asked one evening when William was about 2 years old. Adelaide thought for a moment. "Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like. But then I look at our life, at William, at you, and I know I made the right choice. I may not be teaching in a schoolhouse, but I am teaching our son, and that is more important to me than anything." "You could still teach if you wanted," Yates said. "We could hire someone to help with William." But Adelaide shook her head. "Maybe someday when William is older, but right now this is where I want to be, right here with you." Yates pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Adelaide Remington, more than I ever thought it was possible to love another person." "I love you too," Adelaide said. "Thank you for saving me that day, for giving me a reason to stay." "You are the one who saved me," Yates said softly. "I was just existing before you came along. You taught me how to truly live." 2 years later, Adelaide gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Jane. She had Adelaide's hazel eyes and Yates's dark hair, and from the moment she was born, she had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. William, now 4 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He would sit next to her cradle for hours, singing to her and showing her his toys. It was clear that the two children would be close. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew, the cattle multiplied, and Yates and Adelaide's love for each other only deepened with time. There were challenges, of course. A drought one year that nearly destroyed their herd. A bad winter when William caught pneumonia and they almost lost him. The constant worry that came with living on the edge of civilization, where danger was never far away. But they faced everything together, drawing strength from each other and from their love for their children. Yates would sometimes think back to that day in the canyon when he had heard gunshots and made the split-second decision to investigate. If he had been 5 minutes later, if he had decided to take a different route, his entire life would be different. Adelaide would not be his wife. William and Sarah would not exist. It was a sobering thought. How much could hinge on a single moment, a single choice? But it also made him grateful for every day he had with his family. When William turned 7, Yates began teaching him the skills he would need to run the ranch someday. They would ride out together in the mornings, checking on the cattle and mending fences. Yates taught his son how to read the weather, how to spot a sick cow, how to rope and brand. But he also taught William the things his own father had taught him. About honesty and integrity, about standing up for what was right even when it was hard, about treating others with respect and kindness. Adelaide taught Sarah to read and write, and the little girl showed an early aptitude for learning. She was curious about everything, always asking questions and wanting to understand how things worked. "She is going to be a teacher, just like you wanted to be," Yates said to Adelaide one evening after Sarah had peppered them with questions about the stars for an hour. Adelaide smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe she will be a scientist or a writer. Whatever she wants to be, we will support her." By the time William was 10 and Sarah was 6, the ranch was one of the most successful in the region. Yates had expanded the herd and bought additional land, and he now employed 5 full-time ranch hands. The ranch house had been expanded as well, with more bedrooms and a proper dining room. But despite their success and the growth of their family and business, Yates and Adelaide never forgot what was truly important. They still made time for each other, still took evening rides when they could, still sat on the porch and watched the sunset. One evening, as they sat together watching William and Sarah play in the yard, Adelaide leaned her head on Yates's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "What are you thinking about?" Yates asked, wrapping his arm around her. "I am thinking about how different my life could have been," Adelaide said. "If you had not saved me that day, if I had not stayed, I would have missed all of this. Our children, our home, our life together. I cannot imagine it." "Then do not," Yates said, kissing her temple. "We are here now, and that is all that matters." "Do you remember what I said that first night at the ranch?" Adelaide asked. "When you asked me why I came to Utah. You said sometimes courage is just another word for having nowhere else to go," Yates recalled. "I was wrong," Adelaide said softly. "Real courage is not about having no choice. Real courage is choosing to take a risk on something uncertain, something that scares you. Staying here with you, agreeing to marry someone I had only known for 2 weeks, that was the most courageous thing I have ever done. And also the best." Yates felt his throat tighten with emotion. Even after all these years, Adelaide could still move him with her words. "I am the lucky one," he said. "I was drowning in loneliness before you came along. You saved me just as surely as I saved you." As the years continued to pass, the ranch became a true family legacy. William grew into a strong, capable young man who shared his father's love for the land and his mother's business sense. Sarah became a voracious reader and eventually did become a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch for the children of the ranch hands and nearby families. Yates and Adelaide grew older together, their hair turning gray, their faces developing lines and wrinkles. But their love never faded. If anything, it grew stronger, tempered by years of partnership and shared experiences. When William turned 18, he married a sweet girl from Beaver named Lucy Turner, and they built a house on the far side of the ranch property. A year later, they had their first child, making Yates and Adelaide grandparents for the first time. "I cannot believe we are old enough to be grandparents," Adelaide said, cradling her tiny granddaughter in her arms. "Speak for yourself," Yates teased. "I am still young and spry." Adelaide laughed. "You are 56 years old and your back went out last week lifting a feed sack." "Minor setback," Yates insisted, making her laugh again. Sarah also eventually married, choosing a young lawyer from Salt Lake City who had come to Beaver to open a practice. They divided their time between the city and the ranch, and Sarah continued to teach, eventually writing several books about education in frontier communities. Through it all, Yates and Adelaide remained the center of their growing family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They celebrated holidays together, worked side by side during branding and harvest, and supported each other through both joy and sorrow. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Yates planned a surprise for Adelaide. He took her back to the spot where they had first met, that canyon where he had saved her from the bandits. "You remember this place?" he asked as they stood looking out over the desert landscape. "How could I forget?" Adelaide said. "This is where my life truly began." Yates reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with the date of their wedding. "25 years ago, I saved your life," Yates said, fastening the bracelet around Adelaide's wrist. "But you saved mine too. You taught me that a life shared is infinitely better than a life lived alone. You gave me children and grandchildren, purpose and joy. You turned a house into a home and a lonely rancher into the happiest man alive." Adelaide's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the bracelet, then at her husband. "We saved each other," she said, "and we built something beautiful together." They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, watching the sun set over the canyon just as they had watched it set from their porch so many times over the years. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of another tomorrow. More years passed, bringing both joy and sorrow. Yates's old ranch hand Tom died, and they attended his funeral in Beaver, remembering the man who had been such a loyal friend. Adelaide's friend, Mrs. Peterson, passed away in her sleep at the age of 80, and the whole town mourned her loss. But there was also joy. More grandchildren were born, and then great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under William's management, with Yates stepping into more of an advisory role as his health began to decline. When Yates turned 65, he finally admitted to Adelaide that he was tired. His body ached in ways it never had before, and the work that had once been second nature now exhausted him. "Then rest," Adelaide said simply. "We have worked hard all our lives. We have earned the right to slow down." So they did. They turned over more of the ranch operations to William and spent their days doing the things they loved. Reading, riding when Yates felt up to it, sitting on the porch watching their grandchildren play. They traveled to Salt Lake City to visit Sarah and her family, and even made one trip back east to Philadelphia so Adelaide could see where she had grown up. But they were always happiest at the ranch, surrounded by family and the land they had built their life on. One evening, when Yates was 72 and Adelaide was 69, they sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together at the end of the day. William and his family lived in the main house now, having taken over full management of the ranch, while Yates and Adelaide lived in a smaller house William had built for them nearby. "You have any regrets?" Adelaide asked suddenly. Yates thought for a moment, then shook his head. "Not a single one. Everything I have done, every choice I have made led me to you and to this life. How could I regret any of that? I used to wonder sometimes," Adelaide admitted. "About the path I did not take, what kind of teacher I would have been, whether I would have been happy in that life." "And," Yates prompted. "And I know without a doubt that I made the right choice," Adelaide said. "I could have taught hundreds of children in a schoolhouse, but instead I helped raise our children and grandchildren. I have had a partner who loves and respects me, who has shared his life with me completely. I have had adventure and love and purpose. What more could anyone ask for?" Yates reached over and took her hand, marveling as he always did at how perfectly it fit in his. "I love you, Adelaide Remington. I have loved you since the moment you first looked at me with those fierce hazel eyes in the canyon, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Adelaide said. "My rescuer, my partner, my best friend. Thank you for giving me a reason to stay all those years ago." "Thank you for staying," Yates said. They sat together as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red and purple. In the distance, they could hear the laughter of their grandchildren and the lowing of cattle. The ranch was alive and thriving, a true testament to everything they had built together. Several more years passed peacefully. Yates's health continued to decline gradually, and Adelaide developed arthritis that made her hands ache, but they remained active and engaged with their family. They celebrated William and Lucy's 30th wedding anniversary, witnessed Sarah publish her 5th book, and welcomed their 8th great-grandchild into the world. On a cool autumn evening, when Yates was 76 years old, he and Adelaide sat on their porch as usual, wrapped in blankets against the chill. The leaves on the trees Adelaide had planted so many years ago were turning gold and red, and the air smelled of wood smoke and approaching winter. "I am tired, Adelaide," Yates said quietly, "more tired than I have ever been." Adelaide squeezed his hand. "I know, my love, rest now." "Will you stay with me?" he asked. "Always," Adelaide promised. "I will always stay with you." Yates leaned his head back in his chair and closed his eyes, a peaceful smile on his face. Adelaide sat beside him, holding his hand, and they remained that way as the stars came out one by one overhead. When Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep that night, With Adelaide by his side, the entire town of Beaver mourned. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched over the years. He was laid to rest in the small cemetery overlooking the ranch, in the land he had loved so much. Adelaide continued to live on the ranch, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Though she grieved deeply for Yates, she also felt blessed to have had so many years with him. She would sit on the porch every evening, even after he was gone, imagining he was beside her. 3 years after Yates's death, on a warm summer evening very much like the one when they had first met, Adelaide passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was 79 years old. Her family buried her beside Yates, reuniting them in death as they had been united in life. The ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family. And every evening at sunset, whoever was living in the main house would stop their work and look toward the western horizon, remembering the love story that had started it all. The story of a lonely rancher who had saved a woman from bandits, and how she had stayed to thank him and never found a reason to leave, because she had found something far more valuable than safety or security. She had found love, purpose, and home. The Remington Ranch stood as a testament to what two people could build when they chose to take a chance on each other, when they chose love over fear, partnership over isolation. And though Yates and Adelaide were gone, their legacy lived on in the land they had nurtured, the family they had raised, and the love story that had become legend in Beaver, Utah. Their great-grandchildren would tell the story to their children, and those children would tell it to theirs, how a single act of courage in a desert canyon had changed the course of so many lives. How Yates Remington had been riding home one day and heard gunshots, and instead of riding away to safety, he had ridden toward the danger and found his destiny. And how Adelaide Foster, who had lost everything and been prepared to start over alone in a strange new place, had found something she had not even known she was looking for. She had found a partner who saw her strength and loved her for it, who had given her space to grow while standing beside her every step of the way. Years later, when the state of Utah erected historical markers for significant locations, they placed one at the site where Yates had rescued Adelaide. It reads simply, "On this spot in 1878, a chance encounter changed 2 lives forever and created a legacy that would endure for generations. Sometimes fate arrives not with fanfare, but with the simple choice to help a stranger in need." The canyon remained wild and beautiful, largely unchanged by the passage of time. And on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right, locals swore they could hear the echo of laughter carried on the breeze, the sound of 2 souls who had found each other against all odds and had chosen to build a life together. The Remington Ranch continued to operate well into the 21st century, one of the oldest continuously operating family ranches in Utah. And in the main house, passed down through generations, hung a portrait of Yates and Adelaide, painted on their 50th wedding anniversary. In the painting, they sat on their porch, his arm around her shoulders, both of them smiling at something beyond the artist's view. And if you looked closely at their faces, you could see it there in their eyes, that spark of love that had never dimmed, that had sustained them through hard times and good, through youth and age, through every challenge life had thrown their way. It was the kind of love that happened once in a lifetime, the kind that changed everything. It was the kind of love worth taking a risk for, worth staying for, worth building a life around. And it had all started with a lonely rancher who had been in the right place at the right time, and a brave woman who had been willing to trust a stranger. Together, they had created something extraordinary, something that would outlast them both. Their story became a reminder to everyone who heard it that love often arrives when we least expect it, in forms we might not recognize at first. But when we find it, when we recognize it for what it is, the only choice that matters is to hold on tight and never let go. And that is exactly what Yates and Adelaide had done. They had held on to each other through everything, had built a life of purpose and meaning, had raised a family and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had turned a chance encounter in a dangerous canyon into a love story for the ages, proving that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we choose courage over fear, hope over cynicism, and love over loneliness. The ranch stood as a monument to their love, every fence post and barn board a reminder of the life they had built together. And as new generations of Remingtons worked the land and raised their own families, they did so knowing they stood on the foundation of something truly special, something that had started with a gunshot in a canyon and a split-second decision to help a stranger. That was the legacy of Yates and Adelaide Remington, not just the land or the prosperity they had created, but the example they had set. They had shown that real strength comes from partnership, that the greatest adventure is the one you share with someone you love, and that home is not a place but a person, the one who makes you feel complete.